Crystal glasses chimed like distant bells, blending with the soft piano from the corner of the grand hall. It was the 10th birthday of Daniel Langston, the only son of the prestigious White Langston family, hosted in their white mansion, perched atop the northern hill, where every gate stood tall like a fairy tale, and every chair could name someone who once sat on it. Daniel, autistic from trauma after a past accident, hadn't spoken a word in 4 years. He sat quietly at the head of the table, dressed in a perfectly tailored little suit, his pale gray eyes drifting like a winter lake so still, everyone assumed nothing moved inside anymore. But then, the unthinkable happened. As the birthday cake rolled out to applause, Daniel suddenly turned his head. His eyes locked onto a slight figure hidden near the velvet curtains. A thin black girl standing quietly at the back. Ellie, 9 years old, the daughter of the longtime maid of the Langston household. Daniel opened his mouth. His voice was soft, clear and dry like a field after rain. "Ellie, come eat. Sit here." The entire hall fell silent, as if someone had turned off the sound. Guests froze. A few wine glasses nearly slipped. An elderly woman clutched her chest, mouthing, "He spoke." Ellie stood frozen, her wide eyes locked onto Daniel, fists clenched as if holding something too precious to let drop. Daniel repeated, "Ellie, sit here." The white MC stumbled back. The birthday music cut off. The butler glanced toward the host, then nodded slightly to Ellie. "Go on. Master Daniel invited you." Ellie stepped forward, hesitant, each foot sinking into the thick velvet carpet like it weighed her down. Daniel smiled at her, a smile no one had seen in years. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." "Perhaps ever." Then came the murmurs from the crowd. "He spoke. Did that black girl use magic? My God, 4 years." And he calls out to the help's daughter. A guest raised a glass to Daniel's breakthrough. Applause erupted like fireworks exploding silently inside hearts. Even the staff, white and non-white, paused, some smiling genuinely. But one person did not smile. William Langston, the mansion's master, Daniel's father, known as the Iron Hand of the market, sat at the opposite end, his hand resting lightly on a silver spoon. His eyes followed Ellie like a loose piece on a delicate board. His face blank, but the skin on his forehead tightened. His jaw shifted slightly. His eyes held no warmth, no chill, only a dough. Just as Ellie reached the chair beside Daniel, William placed his spoon down. The click was quiet, but sharp enough to still the room. He stood. No one knew what he was about to say, but he didn't speak. He simply straightened his collar, pulled out his chair, and walked silently across the frozen room and exited the hall. The door creaked open. A breeze swept down the corridor, rustling a ribbon on a floral centerpiece. A child at another table dropped their spoon, but no one bent to pick it up. A guest whispered, "He's furious that his son called a black girl in front of everyone." Another muttered through her teeth, "Maybe he thinks it stains the Langston bloodline." The butler bowed his head. The music remained off. Ellie stood still, unsure if she should sit. Daniel, still unaware, looked around innocently, then called again, "Ellie," his voice soft as silk. But this time, no one answered. Someone hurriedly turned the music back on. The MC retrieved his microphone. An older guest offered, trying to console. "Maybe Mr. Langston just needs a minute after all." His son did just speak for the first time. But no matter the speculation, no one could have guessed that his silence, that departure, wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The beginning of something that would either become a tragedy or a miracle. The morning after the party, before sunlight even touched the lower windows, Ellie was summoned to the master's study. Her hair braided neatly on both sides, she wore a faded uniform dress, climbing each stair as if they were swelling lumps growing heavier in her chest. William Langston sat behind a mahogany desk, his posture rigid, fingers interlaced like he was wringing out his own thoughts. No smile, no greeting, only a question. cold and dull as a blunt knife slicing silk. How did you manipulate him? Ellie froze. Sir? Who? William didn't answer directly. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Who told you to teach him to speak? What did you do to him? I didn't teach him anything. Master Daniel just called me. Don't lie. His voice wasn't loud, but sharp. It clamped down on Ellie's throat like an invisible hand. William stood, circling around the desk. He moved around her like a hawk sizing up prey bound to the ground. 4 years, he hasn't spoken to anyone. Not doctors, not therapists, not even me, his father. And now suddenly, just because of you, he speaks. Why? Ellie kept her eyes down. Her small legs trembled. I don't know, sir. I never meant to do anything wrong. William stared at her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. Not angry now, but restrained, bitter. Get out. The door behind her creaked open. Ellie walked away, step by heavy step, never daring to cry. She knew tears had no place in this house. Not from a little black servant girl. That day, her mother, Angela, the Langstons' long-serving housemaid, was suddenly reassigned. Once in charge of food storage, she was now sent to scrub the backyard, soar the kitchen floors, and haul waste. The younger white maids looked at her with smug disdain, as if the incident at the party had stained the Langstons' name. That girl really knows how to act. Bet her mom coached her to cling to the master. A black girl at the dining table. Blood's bound to spill sooner or later. Angela said nothing. She just kept her head down, hands red and swollen, her shoulders shrinking with each scrubbing motion. Ellie tried to avoid Daniel. She understood Mr. Williams' gaze, the silent one that cut through her every time she passed a hallway, the lounge, anywhere near the boy. But Daniel was different. Since that night, he had become more alive. He'd find ways to slip out to the back courtyard, quietly place an apple beside her while she scrubbed the steps. He drew crayon sketches of them sit together on a bench, then tucked them secretly into Ellie's closet. He didn't speak much anymore. But when he saw her, his pale gray eyes would light up softly, deeply enough to stop anyone in their tracks. Ellie adored him. But she was cautious. She replied shyly, quietly joined him in playful games only children could invent. Each time, though, grown-ups appeared like ghosts guarding the mansion. The butler would interrupt. Master Daniel, it's time for your lessons. Ellie, why are you still here? Another time, as Daniel reached to pull Ellie closer during dinner, a maid carrying a tray rushed in, hand raised. Don't touch the young master. Then whispered behind them, people from the lower floor don't smell too pleasant, you know. That night, Ellie went hungry. Her meal had been misplaced. Angela knew, but she said nothing. Instead, she split her own portion quietly in half. After that, Ellie and Daniel could only meet when William was away. Early mornings or late afternoons, they hid in the greenhouse, among herbs and violet orchids, drawing with chalk, piecing together puzzles, or simply sitting silently while Ellie read fairy tales she found in the old library. Whenever Ellie was near, Daniel became more alert, even learning new words again. He smiled, held her hand, once whispering, Mom used to read to me too. One afternoon, while sketching a boat in the garden, Ellie glanced at him, voice tinged with worry. Is it because of your dad? The accident. Is that why you're like this? Daniel paused, then shook his head. No, not Dad. His voice was barely a breath, but Ellie felt it not just in words but in the strange storm of feelings in his eyes. Fear, loyalty, and something unspoken hiding just below the surface. She didn't ask again. She knew where the lines were. In this house, some things were never said, like her skin color, or the loneliness of a rich boy no one dared to touch. Winter came early that year. Cold wind seeped through the basement where Ellie and her mother slept. Their thin blankets couldn't block the chill or the icy stares every time they emerged upstairs. Meals grew smaller. Workdays stretched longer. The whispers turned more cruel. Still, they endured, because as long as they stayed, Ellie could still see Daniel. And to her, in that hellish world, Daniel's smile was the only spark of light left. A secret apple, a hidden sketch, a whispered word in the garden. And Ellie believed, as long as she could hold on to that light, no matter the darkness, she wouldn't forget who she was. That afternoon, the sky darkened, though it was only 3:30. Gray clouds hung low like giant hands poised to smother the Langston estate. Wind swept through the marble halls, carrying the scent of lemon and floor polish into the air. Daniel, true to habit, sneaked out of his study room, barefoot on the second-floor corridor, clutching a picture book. He was trying to make his way toward the greenhouse, where Ellie was likely polishing glass panes with an old rag, as she did every afternoon. But today, the corridor floor was wet. The new houseboy, a skinny white teen named Reed, had mopped the hallway, but forgot to place a caution sign or double-check the slickness. The cleaning solution still clung to the tiles, making the surface shine like glass. Daniel stepped forward and slipped. His body lunged forward, head grazing 2 stone steps. The book flew from his hand, landing a few feet below like a leaf caught in wind. The crash echoed like a crack across the mansion's hush. Ellie, just placing down her cleaning basket, heard it. She rushed out, seeing Daniel face down on the stairs, elbows scraped, lips pressed tight to hold back tears. She screamed, "Daniel!" Without waiting for permission, she sprinted forward, dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she reached to check on him, eyes brimming with tears. "Are you hurt? Can you speak?" "Daniel." He opened his eyes, and when he saw Ellie's face, so close, so real, so frightened for him, Daniel smiled. A wide, radiant smile. "Ellie." Just one word, but more sincere than anything ever uttered in that house. Ellie gripped his hand tightly, unaware of her surroundings, unaware that William Langston was standing at the end of the corridor, witnessing everything. William's face stiffened, his hand curled into a fist. It was the first time he saw Daniel fall like that, but not cry. The first time he saw Ellie, a maid's child, hold his son like she was protecting her own flesh and blood. And the first time he saw Daniel smile after being hurt. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes, those that had always looked downward from a pedestal, were now unsettled, as if he'd wandered into a world he could no longer comprehend. The sharp clack of heels rang out. Clarissa, the long-time maid, emerged from a side hallway. Seeing Ellie cradling Daniel, she shrieked, "You filthy little brat! Who told you to touch the young master?" Ellie pulled Daniel closer, shielding him with her arms. "He fell. He's hurt. You pushed him, didn't you? Always sneaking around. Don't you know your place?" Ellie broke into sobs. She didn't understand why she was being screamed at. Clarissa lunged to yank her away, but then a heavy, commanding voice cut through the air. "That's enough." Everyone turned. William Langston walked forward, each step loud on the stone floor. He looked straight at Clarissa, not raising his voice, only asking, "Who cleaned this floor?" Clarissa pointed at Ellie, about to speak, but William raised a hand to stop her. "I wasn't asking you. I was asking him." The new boy, Reed, had run over, pale-faced. "I know. It was the black girl, sir. She did it." William said nothing. Then, turning to Ellie for the first time, his eyes were not sharp knives, but something softened. "Bring your mother and meet me in my study. Now." Third-floor study. The evening light filtered through oak-framed windows. A breeze stirred the heavy curtains. Ellie and Angela stood side by side, uncertain what was coming. William stood with his back to them, facing the garden. Then finally he spoke. Not angry, not cold, but like a man tired of carrying something heavy for too long. "I'm sorry." Angela and Ellie exchanged glances. He turned, voice lower, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "I let the two of you live in a hell I created. Not because I hated you, but because I hated myself." He walked to his desk and picked up a silver-framed photo. A white woman with blonde hair in a floral dress. Evelyn Langston, his wife, Daniel's mother. His voice dropped, as if speaking only to her. Since the day she died in that accident, the boy survived, but never called me again. No dad, no father, nothing. I tried every doctor, every specialist. Still, silence. And then, he spoke to Ellie. His throat tightened, no tears, but the weight in his tone was undeniable. He called out to a stranger, but never to me, the one who stayed beside him for 10 years, tried everything to fix him. I couldn't understand. I couldn't accept. I thought maybe Ellie had taken something from me I could never reclaim. I was angry, deeply angry, but something else started to shift inside me. He looked at Ellie, the weight in his gaze no longer harsh, but heavy with reckoning. Maybe I saw I was wrong. Maybe it was Ellie's warmth that my son truly needed. But I didn't want to face that. And today, I saw him smile because she held him. He smiled after a terrible fall. He smiled because of her. William exhaled, as if shedding his final layer of armor. I don't know how to be a father. I only know how to be a master. I thought money and power could buy a child's love. But that little girl taught me something no professor ever could. It should have been me running to catch him when he fell, not a maid's daughter. Silence filled the room. Ellie's eyes welled. Angela stayed quiet. William stepped forward and placed a hand, gentle, unfamiliar, on both their shoulders. From today on, things will change. I can't erase the past, but I won't let it repeat. Outside the window, the wind moved through the garden, carrying petals down onto the roof tiles. For the first time in that house, there was an apology and a promise, unspoken but real, that there would be light after the dark. From that afternoon on, the air in the Langston estate began to shift. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but just enough for everyone to feel that something was quietly moving, like a lake slowly losing its chill, like the first spring sunlight seeping into old stone. William Langston, once a man who only stepped into his son's room at therapy time and left like a shadow, now sat down on the carpet with Daniel, clumsily piecing together old Lego blocks. At first, Daniel said nothing. He stayed quiet, distant, observant. But William didn't retreat. He began learning something he'd once dismissed as weakness: patience. He asked Daniel about the picture he was drawing. No answer. He picked up a crayon and continued coloring the corner of a tree his son had left unfinished. Daniel glanced at him, silent, then slid a green crayon across the table toward his father. And so it went, little by little, through shared colors, quiet minutes, and awkward silences. William found his way closer to the one place he'd never reached in 4 years: his son's heart. Not long after, William personally requested Ellie be brought back to the main house. No more hiding. No more menial errands. She was given a new uniform, set hours for morning lessons, afternoon tie, and even her own desk in the library to study art. The subject she and Daniel both loved. Ellie became a gentle beam of light in a house long accustomed to silence. Whenever she smiled, Daniel smiled too. When she read fairy tales aloud, Daniel sat listening, his eyes lighting up as if his mother's memory had returned through the warmth of Ellie's voice. One evening, William walked into the room and saw them coloring side by side. He slowly lowered himself next to them. "Daniel, would you like me to read with you?" Daniel looked up, his pale eyes held still for a moment. Then, very softly, he whispered, "Okay, Dad, just a few words." But to William, it was as if his soul had been pulled out of his chest. He couldn't speak. His heart clenched, not from pain, but from a tremor that shook him to his core. For the first time in 10 years, he was not just a man living in this house. He was a father. Ellie looked up and smiled. William nodded gently, and in his eyes there was no division, no barrier, only acceptance. Days later, William gathered the entire household staff. He stood beneath the grand chandelier where, once, he delivered firings with no hesitation. From today on, he began, Mrs. Angela will no longer be a maid. She will serve as the chief housekeeper of the Langston estate. A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. And her daughter, Ellie, will have her entire education funded by the Langston family. Through to adulthood. Some clapped, others remained still. William scanned the room, his voice calm, clear and final. Anyone who has ever uttered words of insult because of race, status or bias, you may pack your things today. I don't need people who preserve tradition. I need people who preserve humanity. No one dared object. Those who had mistreated Ellie and Angela were long gone. That evening, William sat in the library with Daniel and Ellie. The boy sat between them, a picture book of wild animals open on his lap. William held the book while Ellie pointed at each image, telling Daniel little stories she'd made up. This elephant lost its mother, but it found a little bird that knew the way home. Daniel giggled. William smiled. The garden breeze blew through the half-open window, bringing the scent of jasmine and old timber. Every barrier had melted. No more master and servant. No more black and white. No more accusation or suspicion. Only three souls, teaching one another how to listen, how to reach, how to love in a language deeper than words. At a private press event for the Langston Education Fund, William was invited to speak. He stood before a long row of seats filled with investors, administrators, and educators. He paused. Then he began, not as a man once at the top of a business empire, but as a father, as a man reborn. They say love has no color. I didn't believe that, not because I was prejudiced, but because I believed in boundaries. Roles, walls, that crossing them would bring disorder. He looked down at where Daniel sat, still holding Ellie's hand. I used to fear my son would never call me dad, and I used to resent a little girl for being called instead. But now I see, she didn't just teach my son to speak, she taught me to listen. Silence fell. Then, applause. Slowly at first, then thunderous. And at last, on an early summer afternoon, when the sun pierced through the canopy of old trees, casting fractured beams of light across the garden grass, three people sat together. William Langston rested on the center bench, Daniel's head leaning gently against his shoulder, a half-read book in his hands. Ellie sat beside them, a scarf draped over her knees, continuing a fairy tale she'd begun. No one said much. They didn't have to. At that moment, every distance had vanished. All that remained were three souls, a failed father, a silent boy, and an invisible girl, sharing a story, a patch of sunlight, and a life just beginning. There are stories that don't begin with love, but with silence, misunderstanding and prejudice. But like every game of chess, what matters isn't your first move, it's how you end it. Daniel, a boy long believed to be trapped in a world without words, spoke his first, not to his father, but to an unknown black girl named Ellie. And what seemed like a misstep became the first piece in an unexpected journey of healing. Ellie had no title, no right to speak, but through quiet strength and unarmored kindness, she awakened a child and a father. Because love doesn't need applause. It only needs to be believed in, seen, and given, regardless of skin, status, or whispers. And when grown-ups finally learn to bow their heads and listen to a child, then maybe, just maybe, even a broken world still has a chance to begin again.